Good morning, everyone. 9 here again. It's the end of November, -2 degrees outside. We got our first significant snowfall of the season. And to be honest with you, even if you have the best Army surplus gear money can buy, gunfighting this time of year in this part of the world has a whole new meaning. No matter what, it's episode 5, and we're going to get on with some of the concepts I want you to have for dry training. So, first off, any place you set up where it's safe and legal to do so, dry training, make sure you sanitize that area so it is free of live ammunition, and make sure you sanitize yourself and your person so you are free of live ammunition before starting your dry training sequences. Next thing I want to cover is, all right, you've figured out you've got a holster, you've got a belt, you're working on the concept of where your magazines are going to go. You need to understand too that not all magazines are created equal. And I want to talk about charging your magazines for those of you that have the more modern firearms that also have more difficult magazines to charge. Some of you will have gotten what's known as a mag loader with your equipment. And in this case, here's a quick demo on how the mag loader works with this particular style of magazine. Loading cartridges in here one at a time with thumb pressure, very difficult. Hence why they give you the mag loader, or what we used to call a mag lula. In this case, the tapered front goes to the front of the magazine, the bullet side, and the whole unit slides down over top of the magazine. Now this is difficult to do without pushing down on a hard surface. I'm going to do this by pushing down on a hard surface. I'm going to squeeze the front piece in, push down as hard as you can. You're going to take a cartridge, this is a dummy cartridge, and you're going to drop it in the opening. You're going to release the front part, slide the mag lula back up, squeeze, push down, and again, while you're pushing down and squeezing, you're going to put another dummy cartridge in the assembly. You're going to release the front part and let it come back up. This magazine is now charged with 2 dummy cartridges. That's what this is for. Now, if you bought a surplus firearm, an old military boat anchor, magazines are easily loaded just by pushing them in with your hands. The new stuff, you might need one of these. Dry training purposes, okay? Some of the other things we want to deal with is which came first, the chicken or the egg. So, what is it? Do we start working on drawing from the holster, or do we start working on the fundamentals? In this case, you're going to do both at the same time. Okay, once again, before we start any of our official dedicated training sessions, I want to remind everyone of the 4 universal firearm safety rules. Rule number 1, treat every firearm as if it is loaded. Rule number 2, never point the firearm at anything you do not wish to kill or destroy, including your own body parts, except when you're engaged in the process of prove and rendering the firearm safe. Keep your finger off the trigger is rule number 3 until your sights are on target and you've made a conscious decision to shoot. And rule number 4 is know your target and beyond. Everything around it, above it, below it, behind it, and around you. The discharge of a firearm is a lot of commotion, and you cannot operate in that in tunnel vision. Now, I've already proven my firearm safe. I've sanitized myself and my area. You guys are smart enough to figure out how to do that on your own. There's no point in me demonstrating that over and over and over again for you. Let's get straight to the point. What do we do first? The chicken or the egg? Do we work on the draw from the holster and how to do that properly? Or do we work on the dry firing and mastering the basic fundamentals? In this case, in generalities, starting with a semi-automatic firearm, I'm going to give you bits and pieces of it mashed together and where I think you can start and get on with your training. It's like this, okay? I've got one of the polymer frame modern day firearms, striker fired in a modern day polymer Serpa style holster. You're going to get a hold of that, okay? It's not going to be your first and final grip. That's an expression you will hear lots of as we move forward, but you're going to get a hold of that as high up as you can, and you're going to have to disable the holster mechanisms that retain it to draw it out. When you disable the mechanisms, in the case of this Serpa holster, it's push a button, and you draw it out. I want you to lift your elbow and then immediately bring it parallel to the floor. At the whole time, keeping your finger off the trigger. It's that simple. That's the first step, okay? That's how you're going to get it out of the holster initially. From there, we'll work on the other fundamentals like stance, grip, sight picture, sight alignment, trigger press, all that. But that's the first thing I want you to get consistent, is how you get it out of the holster. How do you get it put back in the holster? You look at the holster, you look at the firearm and make sure that it is in a safe condition to go back in the holster. Look at the holster, you put it in the holster, make sure it's secured. All of that without your finger on the trigger. So far, so good. Now let's talk about this part on top of your firearm, these two little pieces right here. These are the sights, front sight and rear sight. And how do we use them and how important is it? If you are going to get to the Sith Lord, John Wick, John Wayne, Jedi, Mandalorian, the way level of competence with your sidearm, these are tools that you use to train to get to that level, the sights. There's many different configurations, and in the modern day, there's also red dots that go on top of it. And if you choose a red dot, that's fine too. I like to start with the basics or the rudimentary sights on it, as that's the best aid for me to train to the highest level. Now, what's important about the sights? If you look on the wall here, I have a diagram that shows conventional sights. What I want you to understand is this phrase: equal light and equal height. When you hold out your sidearm and you look at the sights, okay, if you focus on the front sight, the rear sight will be slightly fuzzy and the target itself will be slightly fuzzy. You cannot focus on more than one thing at different distances. Here's where we start. Use the sights. The front sight, crystal clear, equal light on both sides, equal height between those three level surfaces. Now, if you got one of the new plastic fantastic, I shouldn't say that, that's a Plowboy Ghost expression. If you've got one of the new polymer frame guns or a modern sort of combat pistol, chances are it has 3 tritium dots on it or 3 painted dots or some combination thereof. The only difference is the 3 dots are the point of focus, not the front sight and the rear sight. So you need the center dot, equal height and equal light with the other 2 dots in that case. Now that sounds pretty simple. The challenge is putting those sights on your AAA target, just letting it float there somewhere in the middle, okay? And manipulating the trigger without disturbing this perfect alignment. That's the challenge you face next. What do I mean by that? This, put your hand out. Do this with your trigger finger. Move your trigger finger without the rest of your fingers moving at the same time. Most people in the early days cannot do that. When you have the gun in your hand and you manipulate this finger and your other fingers move, it disturbs this sight alignment. That's what it does. You need to work on this, okay, so that you have independent trigger finger movement and that you're not disturbing the sights when you are pressing the trigger. That should be clear as mud at this point. Now, how do you dry train for that? This is what I would do. I would have a target set up on the wall, and I'm going to go through the processes, and keep in mind it's always going to be in slow motion, and I'm going to work on getting that whole trigger press in play without disturbing the sight alignment while it's nice and cold outside and I don't get to go out to the range. It's like this. Once again, go back to your holster, take your hand, put it on the gun as high as you can, and get ready to disable the mechanism. If it's a thumb brake, flip the thumb snap, do whatever you have to get it ready to come. Bring it out of the holster consistently parallel to the floor. One-handed or two-handed, the process is basically the same. This is what I want you to do. I want you to marry your hands up two-handed, bring the gun out, bring it up to your eye level, and then I want you to focus on the front sight, letting it float on the target on the wall. Gently put your finger on the trigger. I want you to manipulate the gun so that it fires without disturbing the sight. Thing to note, if you have one of the Smith & Wesson models, it will not fire unless you have a magazine in the gun. If you have one of the modern day exposed hammer guns, the hammer needs to be cocked. You would do that initially by functioning the slide. Okay? In the case of this gun, you want to see how much trigger press it takes. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to line up the sights. I put the magazine in. I'm going to bring it up to my eye and I'm going to manipulate the trigger. You'll hear the click. And The gun only moved when I took my finger off the trigger. The process is there. It's got to be both ends of that stick. When you manipulate the trigger, out here on your target, focus on the front sight, equal light, equal height, manipulate the trigger in, gun doesn't move, manipulate the trigger out, gun doesn't move. Don't be in a rush to get your finger off the trigger. Start doing that consistently in your dry fire training to build that muscle memory. And then when you go to put it back in the holster, no worries. Reverse the process, bring it down to the holster. Make sure the gun's in appropriate condition to go in the holster. The slide is fully forward in battery. Look at the holster, put the gun in the holster, make sure it's secure. Never be in a rush to put it in the holster. Get it out as quick as you want, but never be in a rush to put it in the holster. If you are done with your firearm, you don't need it out of the holster anymore for whatever reason, you have time to put it in safe. And reality is the risk goes up when you are holstering a loaded firearm. You need to get that built into your system, that muscle memory built into your system so that it is perfect, so that no accidents occur in the future. Especially if you're using a firearm that has a striker fired mechanism and no extra safety. In this case, this firearm has no extra manual safeties. It is only the safety built into the trigger. This trigger does not care what pushes it, okay? When you put it in the holster, if it's the toggle off your jacket or a snap fastener or a button and you jam it in your holster, it can discharge. You need to make sure that that holster is clear, your finger is off the trigger, and that you put it in slowly. If you feel resistance, stop what you're doing. For the rest of the world that has firearms that have external safeties, it's a little bit different. But if you're using one of the modern day polymer frame guns that are striker fired with no other safeties on it other than what's built into the trigger, be extra cautious when you're holstering. Look, holster slowly, make sure it's secure. Use a proper holster. And that should get you started for the dry training session, episode 5. We have more coming. Talk to you soon.